What's going on, YouTube? We're back with another video today, and this one is going to be on the Buck Pursuit Pro here. This is the small model. They also make folders in a large and a small model. So let's go ahead and get into this. Buck released the Pursuit series back in 2020, starting with the original 420HC version, and then came out with the Pro models like this one here in S35VN a little bit later. They've had Pro versions of various models over the years, but they're pretty much always S30V, and then starting last year, starting with the Pursuit models, I believe, all the Pro models were being released in S35VN. That includes a lot of the OG fixed blades, just like the Woodsman, Personal, Pathfinder General, and others like that. I've always kind of been curious how their S30V or even their S35VN now performs with the Bos heat treat that the Buck fanboys say is the best on the market. I mean, in reality, it's really just another heat treater like Peters that follows standard protocols. It's not like you're getting a custom heat treat from a custom maker. So I wanted to test this S35VN and see where it compared to others. Sharpen it using the normal progression, 200 to 1000 grit plated diamond, and 16.4 micron CBN on leather for the strap. But this one is a little different because it's sitting at 16.65 degrees per side, which is the factory angle. I matched the factory angle on this one. I normally test at 18 degrees per side, and we'll get back to why I tested this one a little lower in a minute here. For anyone who's never watched any of my tests before, we cut cardboard in a 1-inch section of the blade until it will no longer cut computer paper cleanly. This one cut 215.33 feet. Which is more than any S35VN I've tested so far. But we all know that lower edge angles lead to better edge retention, so taking that into account, it falls right into line with all the other S35VN. So that tells me that they're heat treating it well, but I mean, obviously nothing better than what's currently out there. Now, for the reason that I left this at the standard factory angle of that 16.65, Buck started using lower edge angles than most companies years ago when they switched from 440C to 420HC, and most would argue that that's a step down in steel, but Buck found similar edge retention to 440C if they dropped the edge angle. Now, obviously that's common knowledge today. Lower edge angles almost always equal better edge retention, but back then that was not something that was, as widely known. 420HC was also an easier to sharpen steel for most people with the more basic abrasives that they had back then for sharpening. On top of that, it was also probably easier for them to manufacture and work with, probably reducing costs a little bit. This is actually super interesting if you look into the history of why and when Buck made this change. There's been a huge push for better geometry in production knives over the past few years, and it's actually pretty funny to learn that Buck was already doing that over 20 years ago with their different edge angles, the lower edge angles, to increase edge retention. Now, this isn't without some negatives. While Buck's edge geometry is great, their blade geometry is not. This is a hollow grind, and it's not very deep at all. It's pretty shallow, and they're pretty thick behind the edge. This one is anywhere from 28 thousandths behind the edge back here all the way up to about here or so. And then all the way out here at the very tip, it's 36 thousandths. That's pretty normal for it to get pretty thick at the tip, so not too concerned there. But 28 thousandths behind the edge is pretty thick. And that's after just a couple sharpenings or so on this knife. So obviously it's going to get thicker with time. I'm not thrilled with that blade geometry at all. Grinding it that thick definitely improves toughness for the end user, and it probably reduces warranty claims on Buck's side. And probably reduces broken blades from misuse that you're probably going to see out of most people who buy Buck knives. But it makes sharpening these knives awful. The bevels are huge, and you have to remove a ton of material in sharpening. So this one is currently sitting at, like I said, at 16.65 degrees per side. And you can see just how big that edge bevel is. I mean, that is pretty darn thick. Now, if I go to something that's ground a little bit thinner, or quite a bit thinner actually, this knife is also sitting at 15 degrees per side. This is that knife in ABL from last time, or that last video. And you can't even see the edge bevel because it's so small. I'm not saying that buck has to go that thin, but thinning this thing out to like 15 to 20 thousandths behind the edge would be awesome. So with it being this thick, it also makes sharpening awful. It makes it not a fun task at all. The bevels are huge, and you have to remove a ton of material in sharpening. I've heard guys complain about this a lot. You know, people, obviously probably not the people who are going to be watching this video, but I've heard guys complain a lot about how difficult their buck knives are to sharpen, and I would be willing to bet that's the reason why a lot of people complain, is just because of how thick that is and how much material you're going to have to take off just to sharpen this. Also, a lot of models show up with a recurve ground in them. This one included. Whether this is intentional or not, I'm not totally sure, but this also makes sharpening very difficult for a lot of people. Honestly, recurves are just a massive pain in the ass to work with. This one has most of that recurve gone, as you can see there, but it does have a little bit of a smile back here, and that's just due to the lack of a distinct plunge grind here. You can see where that plunge starts right in there, but it's not very distinct. It's kind of rounded over. It's like they ground a plunge, but they couldn't totally commit to it. It's just kind of poorly executed, in my opinion. This particular knife showed up to me. Obviously, this was used before. This is not even my knife. This is somebody else's. But it showed up to me with a pretty decent sized chip in the bevel and the recurve ground into it, obviously. Sharpening this on the 400 grit super vitrified diamond stone, which is literally the best stone on the market for this kind of thing. It took over 45 minutes to remove the chip and remove the recurve. Now imagine an average user trying to do the same thing who at best has just a diamond plate to do that, and that would more than likely take hours. Sharpening that long for just about anybody gets frustrating, and I can see why some guys get frustrated trying to sharpen their buck knives, and I don't even think that they realize the reasons why it's frustrating. It's not even their fault. It's just that these things are ground so thick, ground with recurves in them, that makes it very difficult for most people to sharpen. And basically what I'm getting at here is that buck does a lot of good things, but still misses on some others. There's a good heat treat, great edge geometry, but really, really poor blade geometry that leads to frustration for a lot of people. Fix those things and you have a real winner here. Honestly, I thought this was a very good knife. Way more comfortable than I thought in testing. The handle was actually very comfortable, being that like rubber overmold with the exposed spine here. It's very comfortable in testing, have no issues there. And it also has a great profile for its intended use as a skinning knife. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe. 90% of my views come from people who aren't subscribed, so help me out and hit that sub button. And as always, guys, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.